with which things having been known, the chiefs of Britain, who after the battle to Caesar had come, amongst themselves having spoken, since they knew the horsemen and the ships and the grain to be absent to the Romans, or to be gone from the Romans, or to these things the Romans didn't have, so a date of a possession, and the scarcity of the soldiers from the narrowness of the camp they knew, so how small the thinness of the camp told them how there were probably few soldiers there, which was even more narrow because of this thing, which camps were more narrow because of this thing, that without baggages Caesar had transported the legions. They decided it'd be best to do, and that's a supine, with a rebellion having been made, to prevent our men from grain and from going back and forth, or from a voyage, and the matter into the winter to draw out. So what they considered best to do were all of these things to prevent the men from going back and to draw out the thing into the winter. Because with these ones having been conquered, and with the hope, and having been shut out from return, so if they're conquered or if they're shut out from return, nobody afterwards, for the sake of carrying in war into Britain, would cross. They were hoping. So they were hoping that nobody would cross into Britain for the sake of bringing in war, with these things having been done. Thus, again, with the conspiracy having been made, a little ways from the camp to leave, and their own secretly from the fields to draw out, they began. And here we get a little bit of this, an interesting section where Caesar's writing about himself and describing how wisely he had ordered things, but you kind of forget that Caesar is the one writing this. But Caesar, although not yet he had known their plan, nevertheless, from the event of his own ships and from this thing that they had neglected to give hostages, that which happens he was suspecting would be. So that which happens, the thing that's about to happen, which is that they're going to be attacking him, he was suspecting to be. That's the future infinitive of to be. And thus, for all misfortunes, he was preparing helps or reserves. So he was preparing for any kind of potential misfortune that might happen. For both, for also grain from the fields daily into the camps he was carrying in, and those ships which were afflicted most gravely of them, from the material of them and from the bronze, for the sake of repairing the remaining ones, he was using. So he was using the material and the bronze for the sake of repairing the other ones. And those things which, for that matter, were of use or were for use, from the continent he was ordering to be put together. And thus, since with greatest zeal it was being tended to by the soldiers, with 12 ships having been lost, with the remainder he made it so that he would be able to navigate most conveniently. While these things were being born, or being waged, with one legion having been sent for grain, according to the custom, which was called the 7th, neither nor with any suspicion having been placed between at that time, adid tempus of war, since part of the men, while part of the men were remaining in the field, part even were going back and forth into the camps. Those who on the gates, or for the gates, of the camp in the station or in the guard station were announcing to Caesar, or announced to Caesar, the dust greater than the custom would carry. So they're saying, they announced that the dust is greater than the custom, when it was custom to be, or than the custom would carry. It's kind of a weird way of saying it. In that part to be seen, into which part the legion had made a journey. Caesar, that which was suspected, something of a new plan to have been begun by the barbarians. The cohorts which in the stations were, like the ones guarding the gates, with him into that part to set out, and from the remainder two into the station, 2 cohorts into the station to secede, so to fill in their spots, the remainder to be armed, and immediately to follow him, he ordered. When a little ways farther from the camp he had proceeded, his own by the enemy to be pressed, so his own men by the enemy to be pressed, and sickly or not very well to sustain the attack. And here are the things he noticed. He noticed his own to be pressed by the enemies, scarcely to sustain, and with the legion having been crowded together from all parts, weapons to have been tossed, he noticed. Since, with all the grain having been cut down from the remaining parts, one part alone was left. The enemy suspected to hear our men would come, and in the nights in the woods they lurked, or they lay hidden, so the enemy hid in the woods. Then, with arms having been put down, the ones dispersed and occupied in reaping, so the Caesar's soldiers were reaping the grain, they were dispersed and occupied with their arms having been put down. Suddenly they attacked, the British guys attacked, with a few having been killed, the remnants or the remainders in uncertain orders, so they were all messed up in their ranks and not in a single battle line. They disturbed. And at the same time, with horsemen and with chariots they had surrounded. This is the kind of fight from chariots. In the first place, through all parts they ride through, and they toss weapons, and by the terror of the horses and by the groaning or creaking of the wheels, the orders very much they disturb. When themselves between the ranks or the troops of cavalry they insinuate, so they go between the cavalry. From the chariots they jump down, and on the feet they fight. The charioteers, meanwhile, a little ways from the battle recede, and thus the chariots they position that if they, as in the foot soldiers, by the multitude of the enemy may be pressed, then a convenient retreat to them they may have. Thus, such is the mobility of the horsemen and stability of the foot soldiers that in battles they excel so much that because of daily use or in daily use and by exercise they make it that in a steep and inclined place, incited or excited horses they are able to sustain and to control in a small and a brief place, and to turn and through the pole to run. So they jump up on the pole of the chariot and jump and run, and to stand on the yoke, and from there into the chariot most quickly they are accustomed to receive themselves, so they get themselves back into the chariot.